Hi, this is Rachel with Fiona Sandwich Patterns, and in today's video we're going to be sewing the Mesa Verde Cliff Palace block. So a few things before we get started. I wanted to talk about just some color and which kind of colors are going to work really well with this block. So for the back, this color back here, kind of the back side of the dwelling, I would use a darker solid color. I would probably choose this color last based on whatever colors that you choose for the rock and then for the dwelling structures. I chose to use really linear fabrics both in my foundation paper piecing and the English paper piecing. And for foundation paper piecing, this will be really simple to use a directional for the dwelling structure. And if this is one of your first FPP patterns, I would not use directional for the rock. I did use this kind of a wood grain fabric, and I kind of like it. You know, it didn't quite turn out quite the way that I wanted to, but when everything is put together, it will look fine. But a little bit about why I chose it. In the Mesa Verde area, there's a lot of striation in the rock, and you kind of have these little knots or additional hidey holes. So I thought this would work really well, but in hindsight, I should have selected something that was more on the orange side. I would, if you're wanting to go for something that is more realistic, I would go for the orange or the pink side. But there are a lot of quilters in the Quilt Along group who are using more modern prints, so really think outside of the box on this one, and take your time and think through where you want to have your focal area. So in both the EPP and FPP, I wanted the dwelling to be the focal area. You could also have there was a really cool picture that I found, and I posted it in the Quilt Along group, that the dwelling was all lit up with candles. Gosh, probably a few years ago. So you could choose maybe an orange for back here. Something like this fabric would be really great back here. And then you could have a darker color here because the light would be coming from the back instead of coming from the front. And then you could also have dark here, so then the back would really be illuminated. You could really play with this quite a bit. But for the foundation paper piecing, I chose to use this fabric because it's really non-directional and it's really not going to matter where the lines are and all of that, so that, you know, I can have it going in any direction and it doesn't matter. I don't have to worry about that. But then you can see I do have this crisscross, which is going to be for the dwelling structure. So those would be my suggestions, to use something that is non-directional for the rocks. Really playing with something that's more directional. Get your feet wet, so to speak. This is because you can lay down the directional, even if it's a number 2. You can start with that one in most of these, and it just makes it really simple to use a directional fabric and kind of start playing with it that way. And then, like I said, I would use a solid. So you'd probably be using 2 prints and then a solid, so then you have a focal area. So this is going to be the focal area. But if you were really impressed with the rock structure and you wanted that to be your focal area, absolutely play around with it. It's just fabric. This is just your paint. And you know, if you don't like it, print the pattern again and make a new one. So what we are going to do is I'm going to put this up over here, and I'm going to lay these in order where they are supposed to go. And don't mind that mine are red. I had a little bit of a mishap and ran out of black ink, so I had to put it back into my design software and print it out in another color. Okay, so this is going to go way out of the frame, so I'm going to start down over here as well. Make sure that you have the picture showing up in the right way. And if you want the too long didn't watch version, we're going to sew these together, and then we're going to sew these and then add the E, and we're not going to press until we add these to this. And the reason is that these little pieces can start to shift, and I find that if I don't press it, the thin strips until it's attached to a large one, it just comes together so much better because the fabric doesn't have a chance to shift. And if you have not foundation paper pieced with me before, I would stop this video here, and I would go and I would watch the national park block video, start with that one, get familiar with that, because this is going to have some angles when you sew these together, and it can be, it's not really tricky, but it can be a little bit frustrating if it's your very first block. And last week's video would also be a great place to start. But for joining these together, it's really simple because all of the seams are straight, the tops and the bottoms will join. And then my other tip that I try to mention in every video is when you're sewing the fabric to the template, it's really good to make sure that when you start and stop on the template, that you're sewing on top of the line as best you can, because then when you're joining the pieces together, it's all going to come together much more easily, because you'll be able to join the top and the bottom, or line up the top and the bottom rather, without worrying about what's going on in the middle. But I am not always the most exact sewer, so I end up doing it this way. So what I do is I look at where the two templates are going to be joining. So I can see that this, these two parts of the dwelling need to match up, ideally. So I start by matching the top and the bottom, and then what I do is I pinch right along where the two dwelling pieces meet with the seams. So you can see where my thumb is, hopefully. And then I'm just going to open this up, and I'm going to take a little peek. And I keep my fingernail right in that area. Now, one word of caution is when you're doing this, you can feel that there's some bulk on the back. So I don't want to put a pin right here, because what's going to happen is the pin is going to shift the fabric down. So I'm trying to keep my finger here, and sometimes I end up just putting it down on the table because it makes it so much easier. And then I always double check to make sure that nothing has shifted, because that's inevitable. And there's still a lot of bulk here, so I'm going to put the pin up a little bit higher. So then that should mean that everything else should match up. And I think it does. It's a little bit tricky to look inside. And I prefer to use pins as opposed to clips, because I find that the clips end up shifting the templates, and because these patterns are really illustrative, we want the picture to come out, and we want all of the joints to match. So I have decreased my stitch length to 1.6. I hope you have between 1.5 to 1.8 in that area. And do that for all of your pieces before you sew them together, so that when you do all of your seams on the template, then it's at 1.6. The needle is in the middle of my presser foot, and I'm going to be sewing along this solid line from top to bottom. On the individual templates, I sew a little bit before to a little bit after, but when I'm joining the blocks, or the templates together rather, I sew from edge to edge as best I can. And you don't need to backstitch because the stitches are so small that they'll just kind of lock in place. And take your time. Sometimes my feed dogs don't want to always track properly, so I find that if I go really, really slow, I can stay on top of the seam allowance. You might be able to see that it hopped off a little bit, but it still worked out really well. So then what I always do is I remove these little tab bits. It's really the seam allowance, but I call it the tab bits. We're going to press the seam open. And we're also going to remove some of these little pieces. It doesn't matter on this one. Sometimes it does on some patterns that are a little bit trickier. The Zion block for the next video is going to be a little bit trickier, so this becomes imperative for taking out these little pieces, because then once you press your seams open, it becomes really difficult to get the paper out. Okay, we're going to set that one aside. So we're going to join C to D, and we're going to follow the same method. Line up at the top and then check inside. And this one is having a harder time matching. I bet I have these backwards. Yep, I do. So it's always a good practice to just check inside to make sure that things are lining up properly, so that you do have the correct sides of your templates together. And those match up nicely. I always say that I would rather have the inside of the block having the templates match up properly rather than the outside of the block, because you're going to have your block sewn together on all four sides, and it won't really matter if you're off by a little bit, but it will really matter if the inside of your block doesn't, the pieces don't match up. Okay, so C to D and do not press, but I am going to remove this here. And if you have watched my other videos, you know that I really do like the Scholastic school glue. This is the one that I prefer, because it helps keep all of the pieces of fabric flat, so there's less shifting. However, it does still shift a little bit, so the do not press helps. A to C, oh okay, we're supposed to do C to D. I see what we're doing here. So by not pressing these, it means that this is going to stay flat. You can see that this is kind of shifted over a little bit, but it hasn't shifted if it's closed. I hope that makes some sense to you. Kind of look at it and play around with it. So if we pressed it open, this is pulling, and we're trying to do everything that we can to alleviate that pulling. And sometimes it gets a little bit tricky, but you can do it. I have faith that you can do it, because this is really not difficult. And in the instructions, if it says press, you can choose if you want to press the seams to one side or the other. I prefer to generally press open. So I just leave that up to you, to whichever way works best for you. And sometimes I find that if I sew one time and pressing seams open works really well, and then the next time that doesn't always work out the same way. So that's the other reason why I usually say press. I want you to decide what is best for you. Like I said, you might find that you like to press seams open, or you might like to press to one side. I like pressing them open because it makes the block lay flatter and it makes the image flatter. But there isn't a right or a wrong answer for this one. Okay, so we're going to remove the tabby bits again. Okay, so then we are going to press, and we're going to press the seams open. So the other thing that I like to do is I like to use a clapper, but it's actually just a log off of a tree in our yard, so it's really nice and big. And so when I press on a larger block, especially when there's a lot more bulk, I like to use the clapper, my log, and I think it was a honey locust. So it's a nice dense piece of log, and I'll set that on top. I like it better than the clapper because the clapper is really long and narrow, and this is bigger. So you could go to Hobby Lobby and you could just get, you know, like just a log slice, and that would probably work really well. But I like to have one that is a little bit heavier so that it has some weight on it. And then the other thing is it helps to disperse the heat evenly, so then things don't pop up. So anyway, and then this is what it looks like so far. Looking good. And then here is the back, and you can see that it pulled just a little bit, but it would have pulled a lot more if we if we had pressed first, and then put the pieces together, or press first and then put the next together. So that is why I like not pressing it, the C block. Okay. We're going to do the same thing, E to F, and do not press, and then we'll attach G to the other side of E. And pin where there is not a lot of seam bulk. And do make sure that you get both sides of the template, because I have noticed that it shifts a little bit. So I just find that it's a little bit easier if I get both sides of the template, especially when you're going to go attach the next piece. Then your pieces just go together so much better. Now the other thing that you can do is you can leave the tabs in, because it helps keep the structure a little bit. Fold over to the larger side and join on the other small side. So E and G are going to be connected. And this is one that I didn't sew really, really well because that always seems to happen. So I want to make sure that the inside of the block is going to look really great. So by not removing the tabs, what ends up happening, let's see what this one looks like. So that's going to be off. I think I'm just going to leave this. I was not exact when I sewed those together. But if I'm off on one side, I'll be on the other. So I guess I'll just leave it. So by not removing the tabs and by not pressing, again, what we're doing is we're allowing the fabric to lay flat where it should be, where we want it to be. And then we can remove the tabs and press the seams open, and it will have the same effect as this, but it'll probably lay a little bit flatter. As you can see, there's a little bit of a ripple here, so I'm hoping that I can avoid that a little bit. We will see. Now here's one that this is wanting to go to either side, and I think that's probably okay. So I'm going to let it just do what it wants it to do. Oh, we did this one backwards. Ha! Press your seam closed again. It is not the end of the world. And then take a seam ripper, and these are not my favorite. I prefer the long-handled seam rippers. And I slide it through really carefully. Making sure that I'm not catching the fabric, I'm just catching the thread. I find that when I do it this way, it does not I find that when I do it this way, it doesn't stretch the fabric. Okay, so this one goes here. E, F, G, of course. So D, E, F goes right here. Goodness gracious. So if you do this, the other thing that you can do is you can starch the block that has the open, not the seam allowance has been removed, and the starch will just help it hold its shape a bit. Okay, and we will attach these. What I'm going to do, since the G piece needs to be attached, is I'm going to attach G and H and then join those to A through F. Okay, so with this one, I am going to starch this. Okay, so then the starch kind of acts like the paper where it's all tight together. And I can sew right along the same seam. And you'll just want to make sure that you're sewing pretty much right along the same place that you had sewn before. That'll just help it look its best. And H is a little bit of a small one. So I'm just going to not remove the tabs. Well, it's a good idea to make sure that your fabric on the underside is laying flat and it hasn't been caught up. That could have been a little bit of a problem. I would have had to unpick the seam. And that's another reason that I really enjoy using glue to help hold the last piece down. Is because I have less of that where the fabric will kind of get stuck between the fabric and the template. Oh, good. That looks excellent. Looking great. I'm really thrilled with this. And then I and J. Okay, so I had a little bit of an issue when I was sewing this together. I sewed them in the wrong order. So I had to pick out this seam. So it's kind of lost a lot of its integrity because it's been sewn over a few times. So I'm going to add some more glue, and then the glue adds some more structure to the template. So then it should hold it together so I can get these sewn together. Alright, remove your tabs. This would be such a fun block to do in different seasons. If you've been to Mesa Verde in the winter, the rock color is very different. It would be really fun to do it kind of with some, I should look, yep, that's correct. It's always a good idea to check and make sure everything is right before you're all done. So Mesa Verde in the winter is very, very different. The rocks are almost more kind of a blue tone, kind of a creamy and blue tone. It'd be really fun to have snow fabric with this. One bummer about visiting Cliff Palace in the winter, or Mesa Verde in the winter, is that the Cliff Palace is not open. But it is a really cool park to visit in the winter. All right, and then we're going to sew the two sections together. Okay, so let's talk about easing really quick, because this one is looking like it kind of was off a little bit. So if you have a situation where you need to ease your templates together, I prefer to have the bulk on the bottom. I will sometimes pin on the top, and then I have the bulk on the bottom. And what happens is that the feed dogs really help disperse all of that excess bulk between the top and the bottom. I find that if it is on the top, the presser foot just kind of keeps pushing it, and then you have a bunch or a pucker. So I prefer to have the bulk on the bottom, but I think we can figure this one out and just kind of sew slowly. There's not too much to ease on this. This is always my favorite part. I feel like it's like Christmas morning, opening up presents, and your gift is that you have completed another block for your National Park quilt. I would love to hear when you have visited Mesa Verde. Has it been in the summer or the winter or the fall or the spring? And did you do the Cliff Palace tour? And there we go. Oh, didn't that just turn out wonderfully? I really like the difference in color between the two of these. This just looks so much more vibrant, like the sun is setting and the rocks are really glowing. And then this is just more muted. Both of them are great. I can't wait to see what colors you use for your Mesa Verde block. Be sure to tag me. If you're on Instagram, tag me at Fiona Sandwich. And if you're not in the Fiona Sandwich Quilt Along group, I would love for you to join, and I'd love for you to post pictures of your blocks there as well. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.